When you have the most pro-union president and he touts that he is emboldening the unions, this is what you get.
The first bill he passed, y'all remember the $1.9 trillion COVID relief package?
Yeah.
That only had 1% for COVID vaccines? It had $86 billion, I believe, for union pensions.
These strikes, these UAW strikes, again, are just part of a broader whole picture here, which is that the unions have paid off Joe Biden and the Democratic Party for literally decades on end. And finally, they got their man in the White House, the most pro-union president since Barack Obama, and probably more pro-union even than Barack Obama, who's too elitist. Joe Biden has been in the pocket of the union since day one in Wilmington, Delaware. Well, now all of these unions are seeing their moment to shine.
Oh no, corporations might have to compensate their workers more fairly now that the most pro-union president has emboldened them. Boo-hoo, so sad. It's almost unbelievable to hear them say that, because what these bootlickers don't realize is that they are campaigning for Biden when they say things like that, when they attack him like that. And what they're saying now is either bound to bite them in the ass or help Biden. But it's just a symptom of being rich and out of touch and not knowing how normal people will respond to what you're saying. Now, when Marjorie Taylor Greene, another out-of-touch elite, attacked Joe Biden for doing things that are objectively good, I think, the White House, to their credit, was quick to capitalize on what she said and turned that attack into an ad.
Joe Biden had the largest public investment in social infrastructure and environmental programs that is actually finishing what FDR started, that LBJ expanded on, and Joe Biden is attempting to complete. Programs to address education, medical care, urban problems, rural poverty, transportation, Medicare, Medicaid, labor unions. And he still is working on it.
Yeah, so I wouldn't be surprised if the White House did the same thing with what Tim Scott and Nikki Haley are saying, and even Ben Shapiro.
You have a president that's constantly saying, go union, this is what you get. The unions get emboldened, and then they start asking for things.
The first bill he passed had $86 billion for union pensions.
This president clearly does prioritize union jobs, and he's made very clear here that union workers deserve more, that their pay increases have not come close to the success and the money that all of these auto companies have enjoyed.
But I want to dive into this issue a little bit further, because these Republicans who bet against unions in favor of large multinational corporations are doing so at their own peril, and they don't even realize it. Because a Morning Consult poll finds that 75% of Americans support the United Auto Workers strike, while a Reuters poll found that 58% support the strike, including a plurality of Republicans at 48%. And when it comes to the actors and writers strike, 60% of the country supports it. Now, there's two types of Republicans: those who are anti-union and anti-labor and admit it, and those who are anti-union and anti-labor who don't admit it. But make no mistake about it, all Republicans are anti-union and anti-labor, and some of them are so dumb that they not only attack Biden for being too pro-union, but they attack the striking workers themselves. So let's go back to the comments made by Nikki Haley and Tim Scott in particular. First, let's look at Nikki Haley.
When you have the most pro-union president and he touts that he is emboldening the unions, this is what you get. And I'll tell you who pays for it is the taxpayers. You know, here, from what I understand, the union is asking for a 40% raise. The companies have come back with a 20% raise. I think any of the taxpayers would love to have a 20% raise and think that's great. But, the problem is we're all going to suffer from this. This is going to cause things to go up. And, this is going to last a while. But, when you have a president that's constantly saying, go union, this is what you get. The unions get emboldened, and then they start asking for things that, that companies have a tough time doing.
Yeah. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. It's insane for her to suggest that the workers are the ones being unreasonable and asking for wages companies can't afford, considering the amount of money that the companies that they work for spend on stock buybacks, and not to mention CEO salaries. Because as USA Today reports, when it comes to compensation for CEOs of these companies, GM's Mary Barra makes $29 million. That's $21 million for Ford's Jim Farley and $24.8 million for Stellantis in 2022, as the Free Press recently noted. They weren't even the highest payout to an individual last year at the companies. The honor appears to go to Mike Manley, the former head of Fiat Chrysler Automobiles, who pocketed $54.1 million as part of an agreement inked before the 2021 merger that created Stellantis from FCA and Puget maker PSA Group. But yet, according to Nikki Haley, it's the workers who are being a little bit too greedy, asking for a bit too much when these companies were so kind to offer them 20%. Except that 40% pay increase that the union is asking for is in line with the 40% pay increase that the CEOs got. They're simply asking for their pay to rise at the same percent as their CEO's salary did. But Nikki Haley thinks they're being too unreasonable and it's going to cost the taxpayers. No, it's not. It's going to cost the company. And it should. If your employees make you profits and that profit goes higher and higher each year, why should they not be allowed the same pay increase that the CEO gets? It's just, it's shocking that she would say this on national television. This is such a scandalous thing to say that I think it's worse than Mitt Romney's 47 or 48% comment that he said behind closed doors. But Nikki Haley is so out of touch that she's saying this out in the open. Now, to his credit, Neil Cavuto, who was interviewing her, actually brought up this level of greed from CEOs, but rather than addressing it, she goes on to proudly admit that she's a union buster. I'm not making this up.
This president clearly does prioritize union jobs, and he's made very clear here that union workers deserve more, that their pay increases have not come close to the success and the money that all of these auto companies have enjoyed. What do you say to that?
Well, I'll tell you, in South Carolina as governor, I mean, we were building planes with Boeing. We were building more BMWs than any place in the world. I recruited Mercedes-Benz. I recruited Volvo. We had 5 international tire companies. But I was a union buster. I didn't want to bring in companies that were unionized simply because I didn't want to have that change the environment in our state.
Well, Neil, don't want to say anything about corporate greed, but I will tell you this. I'm a union buster. Straight from the horse's mouth. Unbelievable. Now, the reason why she is a union buster is pretty obvious. It's because her corporate donors know that collective bargaining inhibits their ability to further exploit their workers, and she is operating at their behest, not the behest of the people who she wants to represent. So, I mean, the attacks write themselves. She's calling Joe Biden pro-union while simultaneously calling herself a union buster. It's just incredible to see. But if you keep watching, Nikki Haley goes on to pretend to care about workers' rights, but she uses anti-union talking points straight from corporations, predictably, to make it seem as if workers are actually better off without unions, which is obviously not true. But if that were the case, don't you think that these corporations wouldn't be fighting so vociferously against unions? But I mean, the point is that she at least pretends that she cares about the workers. There's at least that level of self-awareness there. When it comes to Tim Scott, however, his answer was much more blunt. Fuck the workers. Listen.
I think Ronald Reagan gave us a great example when federal employees decided they were going to strike. He said, "You strike, you're fired." Simple concept to me. To the extent that we could use that once again, absolutely.
I mean, it doesn't get any more clear than that. There's nothing that I can say to add to that. He's just saying what he thinks. And what he thinks is that these workers shouldn't be allowed to demand better pay, better treatment. Just fire them. Fuck them. Unbelievable. Now, in a different event, he actually suggested with a straight face that this whole thing, it's not really about better compensation and better working conditions. The workers are just lazy. That's what he actually insinuated.
And we're watching today on every screen around the country, we're seeing the UAW fight for more benefits and less hours working, more pay and fewer days on the job. It's a disconnect from work. And we have to find a way to encourage and inspire people to go back to work.
Yeah, that's the real problem. It's not that these workers are being overworked and underpaid. It's that they're lazy and they want to get paid more for less work. Now, it's incredibly ironic for him to say that, considering that senators are only scheduled to meet for 154 days this year, as Parker Malloy points out. But I mean, this goes back to them being out of touch. You can lie to the American people about a lot of things, and we are heavily propagandized and brainwashed. But one thing that you can't lie to them about is their own lives, right? You can't convince them that they don't work hard enough or that they're fairly compensated, right? And that their employers are treating them well. They can see that that's demonstrably untrue. So you can't lie to them about that. So by trying to pretend as if that is indeed the case when it's not, you're only hurting your own campaign. And for the first time in our generation, workers are finally standing up and taking their power back, while Republicans are trying to dismantle the rights that the last generation fought for and won. An example is child labor laws. As more and more workers demand rights, Republican-led states are responding by bringing back child labor because obviously kids are easier to exploit. So why wouldn't they do that? That's what they think about you. That's how they respond. Rather than paying you fairly, they'd rather allow these corporations to hire your children so they can exploit your kids, because your kids aren't really going to think about fair pay or compensation. Pay them, I don't know, $8-10 an hour, and they're going to think this is awesome. It's wild. It couldn't be more clear where this party stands. They're with the corporate CEOs and the bosses, and they're actively trying to squash labor movements. They're against you, and they're telling you that. And to be clear, I do think that when it comes to the Biden administration, he should be doing more. He's done a lot, but there's always more to do. I think that he should have fought harder for the PRO Act. He does need to join UAW workers on the picket line for sure. And I think that him shutting down the railroad workers strike will be a stain on his legacy forever. It was embarrassing. It was horrible. But having said that, though, he has absolutely made a positive difference. And I think that that's undeniable at this point. And of all people, Ben Shapiro correctly explained why the Biden administration has been so effective. It all comes down to the NLRB.
Maybe part of that is because you actually appointed a union man, head of your labor department, and your National Labor Relations Board, an absolute Frankensteinian monster in terms of its pathetic effect on the American government, the NLRB. It's a disgrace to American government. We abide by all rules and regulations of the NLRB. I have to say that every time, because literally one time I made a joke and they sent us a threat letter. This is what they do for a living. They just threaten businesses that are not in violation of the law. Workers, according to Politico, armed with the power of a tight labor market and at times angered by how employers treated them during the pandemic, have organized with new energy from Hollywood to UPS to Starbucks. There's only one problem. The money ain't there to go around. You can pretend it is, but it ain't.
Who believes this? Who actually buys that load of horseshit? See, this shill says that because his advertisers and funders want him to. But everybody knows that it's intuitively and demonstrably untrue. Income and wealth inequality is one of the biggest issues of our generation. And CEOs are getting paid tens of millions of dollars every single year, buying mansions, buying yachts, buying politicians. But Ben Shapiro has the audacity to claim that the money just ain't there. Well, for some reason, it's there when it comes to stock buybacks and the salaries of CEOs and bonuses for CEOs. But when workers ask for a reasonable raise, well, the money just isn't there, according to Ben Shapiro. I mean, why would you listen to him? To listen to Ben Shapiro if you are a working class citizen means that you are willingly letting him gaslight you and lie to you about your own life. It's ridiculous. And this person purports to speak for a large portion of the population. It's so ridiculous to me. But there is one thing that he's right about, and that is the effect that the NLRB has made or has had on this entire labor movement. And what the NLRB has demonstrated is that even if a president is dealing with a divided Congress and can't pass things that are pro-worker using legislation, all you have to do is appoint someone as the head of the NLRB at the National Labor Relations Board will make a huge, profound difference on the labor movement. We're seeing it right now. It's undeniable. But I mean, remember, at the beginning of this video, I said that there are two types of Republicans, and we've only heard from the vocally anti-labor ones at this point. But there is an increasingly large number of Republicans who know to not be openly antagonistic towards labor because politically that's just not going to do much for them. In fact, it's going to hurt them. As Adam Johnson of True Thought explains, Senator Josh Hawley triumphantly announced in November 2020 that Republicans are a working class party now. That's the future. Senator Tom Cotton has repeatedly heralded the Republican Party as the most likely space for a working class multi-ethnic party to converge. Senator Marco Rubio has been auctioning off this talking point to any credulous or complicit media platform that will give him airtime. Senator Ted Cruz said in 2021 that the most significant political change of the last decade has been that the heart and soul of the Republican Party, we are the working class party now. We are a blue-collar party. He continues, but here's the problem. The supposed working class warriors who have been suspiciously silent. Senator Tom Cotton and Senator Ted Cruz haven't mentioned the strike at all. But what about the Republicans who have issued statements on the strike? All of them, quote, support it as an abstract thing in their head, yet they are throwing their backing behind a version of the strike that doesn't exist, and they offer no support for the actual demands of the strikers or the duly elected representatives of the UAW membership. And this is what that looks like. So here's a couple of tweets from Marco Rubio and Josh Hawley, and as you can see, they're pretending like the workers are striking specifically because of Biden's, quote, radical climate agenda, and that's really what's destroying the auto industry. And Josh Hawley here is pretending, as you can see, that the climate mandates are hurting workers and threatening their jobs, and that's why they're so angry. So on one hand, you can see that they know it's bad to be openly hostile towards the labor movement. That's not going to help them politically. But the problem is that people are way, way smarter than that. They can see that you're being disingenuous. Now, is it more politically savvy than just saying that the workers should be fired and that you're pro-union buster? Sure. There's a reason why even the most anti-union governors and Republicans don't say that they're anti-union. They say they support right to work, which is a policy that would dismantle unions. It's because they know that Americans, by and large, are pro-labor and pro-union. But the workers themselves are telling you what they want. And even if the CEOs came out and said, oh, it's definitely Biden's climate agenda, that's what's hurting our workers, and we care about our workers. The question there is, well, why would these CEOs not take a pay cut themselves? Why push the cost or the supposed cost of Biden's radical climate policies onto workers? Even if you go with their twisted version of what's happening, their mental gymnastics, it still doesn't make sense. There's just no winning for them here. And that's true for Donald Trump as well. He's now signaling support for workers, and a spokesperson for him said that he's on the side of auto workers, and he's always stood with the auto workers, and he actually plans to give a speech in Detroit, conspicuously during the next GOP debate. I wonder if there's any ulterior motives here. But the problem is that it's too late for that. UAW President Shawn Fain isn't letting him feign concern for workers, considering the fact that when he was president, he fucked them over. In response, Shawn Fain said every fiber of our union is being poured into fighting the billionaire class and an economy that enriches people like Donald Trump at the expense of workers, Fain said in a statement to CNN. We can't keep electing billionaires and millionaires that don't have any understanding what it is like to live paycheck to paycheck and struggle to get by, and expecting them to solve the problems of the working class, he added. Exactly. And even if Shawn Fain didn't humiliate him, the fact that he's not joining the picket line directly and giving his speech there to striking workers tells you everything that you need to know. Why wouldn't he show up? Well, it's because they'd probably heckle him, considering he made their lives worse. He made moves to fuck over workers, not help them. So he can pretend that he cares about the workers, but actions speak louder than words. He betted against labor, and he lost, and now his pandering just rings hollow, and even he knows that. CBS News explains, when former President Donald Trump visits Detroit next week, he'll be looking to blunt criticisms from a United Auto Workers Union leadership that has said a second term for him would be a disaster for workers. In 2017, the Trump-era board reversed the decision, holding employers responsible for labor violations by subcontractors or franchisees. In 2019, the board gave a boost to companies that use contract labor, such as Lyft and Uber by emphasizing entrepreneurial opportunity in determining a worker's employment status, making organizing harder. Mark McManus, president of the Plumbers and Pipefitters Union, said in a statement Tuesday that Trump tried to gut the Labor Relations Board under his administration to undo the safeguards that protect working families. Michigan AFL-CIO President Ron Bieber told the Associated Press in an emailed statement that the board, referring to the NLRB under Trump, was stacked with anti-worker appointees who trampled on collective bargaining rights. The union leaders also point to unfavorable U.S. Supreme Court rulings under a conservative majority that grew during Trump's term. The nation's high court has dealt a number of blows to unions, most recently ruling against unionized drivers who walked off the job with their trucks full of wet cement, allowing a civil suit against them to go forward. In 2018, the court's conservative majority overturned a decades-old pro-union decision involving fees paid by government workers. The justices in 2021 rejected a California regulation giving unions access to farm property so they could organize workers. And we're not even scratching the surface. There's a lot more there, but the point is, Trump went after labor. And when you go after labor, there's just no coming back from that. They're not going to let you exploit their strike for political purposes because they can see right through you. They know that you're full of shit. And the labor movement is stronger than it's been in a very long time. And unfortunately for Republicans, this is probably only the beginning because negotiations between airline companies and flight attendants aren't going anywhere. And negotiations between healthcare workers and Kaiser Permanente have also stalled, which means that 2 more strikes could be imminent. That would add tens of thousands of additional workers to the growing number of workers already on strike. And this momentum is incredibly exciting, and it makes me optimistic for the first time in a very long time. But for Republicans, this is going to make them feel even more uncomfortable because they're forced to continue to find ways to spin this as a negative or find a way to signal support without actually addressing the demands or underlying corporate greed that is driving these workers to strike. So, I mean, at the end of the day, it was a smart move for Biden to hype himself up as a pro-union president, even if sometimes he does miss the mark, because he knows at least that this is an issue that is very difficult to obscure or propagandize, and Republicans are certainly going to try, but the problem is that you just can't convince Americans that they're the ones who are getting paid fairly or they're the ones who are lazy while their millionaire bosses continue to treat them like shit and exploit them. And that's not me saying that, that's what the polling shows. So Republicans fucked around by siding against unions, and now they're finding out.
Do yourself a favor and click the join button on YouTube to become a member. Because Mike's doing a great job getting to watch his videos before everyone else is tremendous. Many people are saying this. Join today, folks. You won't regret it.